Dog padded across the pale desert sands just after dawn, tongue lolling, ears pricked for any sound that didn't belong to emptiness. The morning sun hung low and hazy above the dunes, its heat not yet sharp enough to sting, though the air already trembled faintly with coming warmth. Dog had walked this trail before, many times in fact. The desert was harsh, yes, but honest. If something passed through, it left a mark. If something stepped, the sand remembered. Today, the sand remembered nothing. Dog stopped on a gentle ridge where the trail should have narrowed between two wind-carved boulders. He looked down, expecting to see the clear prints he'd made only moments ago. But the sand behind him lay smooth, untouched, as though no paws had crossed it at all. He lifted one paw slowly and pressed it into the ground. The sand shifted beneath the weight, sinking just enough to show a perfect paw print. Dog held still, ears perked, watching it. He waited long enough to be sure. The print existed. It was deep, crisp, undeniable. Then, before his eyes, the edges softened. The depth faded. The shape relaxed into a vague depression. And then it was gone. Dog jerked backward in surprise, stepping into another patch of sand, where again a print formed, held, and then dissolved into flatness as though erased by a ghostly brush. He let out a small, confused bark that evaporated into the dry air. There should have been other footprints too, human ones. The man who camped with him every night, who shared water and shade with him, had walked ahead earlier, leaving a line of bootprints following the trail. Dog had smelled them. He knew where they should be. But now the trail was blank. Dog sniffed the ground, nose brushing hot sand. The scent was faint, oddly faint, as though the desert itself refused to hold it. He circled, searching for the familiar mix of leather, sweat, dust, anything that belonged to his companion. Nothing stayed. Not the scent, not the prints, not even the tiny marks left by skittering insects. Dog trotted forward, uneasy, tail lowered. Every few steps he turned and looked back, hoping to see his own trail, some reassuring sign that he existed in this place the way he always had. But the desert was empty behind him, as if he weren't a traveller, only a passing thought. He barked again, louder. The sound hung briefly in the still air, then felt oddly muffled. The dunes didn't bounce it back. The canyon far behind him did not return even a weak echo. The desert, which always spoke in whispers of wind and shifting sand, refused to answer. Dog's ears folded back with unease. He kept walking. The boulders ahead stood motionless, their curved shadows too sharp for morning light. Dog passed between them, nose low, heart thumping with rising confusion. The man had walked here earlier. Dog had watched him climb this very ridge. There should have been signs, disturbances in the sand, scraps of boot tread, even the imprint of weight where he'd paused to drink. But beyond the stones, the desert stretched out untouched, a blank canvas of soft yellow sand. Smooth, perfect, wrong. Dog stopped walking. His tail stiffened. He pressed his paw down again carefully, deliberately, as if testing reality itself. The footprint formed. Dog held his breath, and then, like warm wax melting under a flame, the print slowly softened, faded, and disappeared into smooth, seamless sand. The desert didn't want to remember him. Not him, not his master, not anything. Dog took a cautious step backward. The sand rose slightly beneath the pad of his paw, not to create a print, but to erase one before it even formed. He froze. A trembling breeze he hadn't noticed before drifted past his ears. Not a normal desert wind, no grit, no smell, no sound, just a thin exhale of air, as though the land itself was sighing at him. Dog growled quietly. That breath came again, soft, deliberate, wrong. And then he understood. The desert wasn't forgetting. It was refusing. Dog crept forward with his belly low and his ears tight against his skull, the strange breath of the desert still lingering in his fur. The sand no longer felt like sand under his paws, too smooth in some places, too soft in others, shifting only when it wanted to, not when he stepped. He paused to test it again, gently lowering his paw onto the surface. This time the sand didn't even attempt to show a footprint. It rose the slightest bit beneath him, meeting his paw like a hand pressed upward in refusal. Dog jerked back. The sand settled instantly, smoothing itself into a perfect, unbroken sheet. The hairs along his spine bristled. He turned and trotted away from the faint trail he thought he'd been following. But after only a few steps, he stopped again, confused. Something was wrong with the distance between the boulders behind him. It should have been 30 paces. Dog knew his own stride, yet when he glanced back, the gap looked closer. Too close, as if he'd only taken 10 steps, or 5. He retraced a bit, paws tapping silently across the unchanging surface. The space between the rocks seemed to breathe, expanding, shrinking subtly as he moved, though never while he was watching directly. Dog took 3 more steps backward. The boulders drifted even closer. No, not drifted. The space between them compressed, as though the desert were quietly folding itself in. He barked sharply, startled. His voice fell flat. He turned in a slow circle, sniffing the still air. His nose caught a familiar smell, faint but unmistakably human. The man's scent. Dog's tail lifted in immediate hope, and he lunged forward, eager to follow it. But the scent vanished after 2 steps. Dog stopped, sniffed again, more urgently. The scent flickered, here, then gone, then here again in a completely different direction, as if the desert released it in quick, teasing pulses. Dog paced in frantic loops, trying to pin down a direction, but every time he found the trail, the desert smoothed it away like an eraser dragged across warm dust. He let out a low whine. This wasn't wind. This wasn't heat. The desert was changing the world beneath his paws. Dog backed up again, panting lightly, but the distance to the boulders changed once more, stretching this time. The gap widened as if drawn apart by invisible hands. He blinked hard. They were far now, too far, twice as distant as they had been moments ago. Dog barked, panicked, desperate. His voice felt trapped in the air, swallowed before it could carry. He turned away from the boulders and began trotting across the open sand, choosing a direction at random. His paws moved fast, scattering grains, pushing his body forward with purpose. But no matter how quickly he ran, the horizon didn't shift. The dunes didn't grow closer, or farther. It was as if he weren't moving at all. Dog slowed, panting, looking down. His paws left no prints, no disturbances. The sand stayed perfect, smooth, unwilling to admit he'd passed. He bolted suddenly to the left, sprinting until his lungs burned, then skidded to a halt, expecting, hoping, to see a changed landscape. But everything looked identical, as if he had never left the last spot. Dog whimpered, confused. He spun again, making sharp, frantic turns, as though trying to outrun the desert's gaze. But every direction felt the same. Blank, stretched, wrong. He lifted his paw and pressed it deep into the sand with all his weight. A faint indentation appeared. Dog stared. For a moment, the shape remained. Then the sand quivered beneath it, a tiny ripple, almost too small to notice, and the print erased itself smoothly, like liquid sealing over a dropped stone. The ground shifted beneath him, not enough to move him, but enough for him to feel it. A slow, deliberate pulse. Dog froze. The sand beneath his paws tightened, growing slightly firmer, as though something beneath it had awakened, or focused. Dog backed away fast. The desert pressed upward again, a soft rise that followed him like breath beneath a bedsheet. Another pulse, stronger, then another. Dog's ears flattened in terror. The desert wasn't just refusing his footprints, it was responding to him, following him, learning his movements. Dog bolted again, straight ahead, faster this time, legs stretching, paws kicking sand behind him in panicked sprays. But the sand swallowed every trace instantly. And worse, the desert moved with him. The ground under him began to shift in soft waves, guiding his run, smoothing obstacles, anticipating his direction, like it didn't want him lost, like it didn't want him gone. Dog's heart hammered. Something beneath the sand, something vast, patient, and newly aware, was adjusting itself to him, and the more he ran, the more the desert learned. Dog slowed only when his lungs burned and his legs shook beneath him. He stood panting in the open desert, chest rising in sharp pulls, tongue dry against the scorching air. But as frantic as his run had been, the land around him looked exactly the same. Smooth dunes, blank sand, horizon still and pale. He hadn't moved, or the desert hadn't let him. The ground beneath him pulsed again, soft but unmistakable. Dog tensed, ears flat. A ripple spread quietly through the sand in a perfect circle around his paws, not like wind-shaping dunes, not like heat-shifting grains. The ripple was too deliberate, too symmetrical. It spread outward evenly, like breath expanding beneath a blanket. Dog jumped back. The ripple followed. Not fast, not aggressive, just matching him. He whined, confused and frightened, and lifted one paw hesitantly. The sand rose slightly to meet it, almost touching his pads before flattening again. Dog barked in alarm. The sand reacted instantly. A small indentation formed directly in front of him. Not his footprint. Too long, too narrow, wrong shape entirely. The sand deepened the mark, adjusting its length, narrowing it again, widening at one end as if trying to guess correctly. Dog stared. The desert was trying to make a footprint, not one he recognized, not canine, not human, not any creature he knew. Just an attempt, a vague shape. A first try at something it had seen others leave behind but never kept. The print smoothed away after a moment, as though embarrassed by its failure. Then another formed, this time closer. A curving dent, half-moon-shaped, too shallow. It wavered, trembling like soft clay under invisible fingers. Then it too vanished. Dog backed up until his hind legs brushed a dune behind him. The dune softened at the contact, shifting to cradle his legs, not sliding like loose sand should. It was trying to hold him. Dog barked again, panicked, but the sound stayed close, trapped in the dead air. Another print appeared, closer, deeper, longer. Dog looked down and froze. The shape was trying to look like his own paw, but stretched, distorted. 4 impressions instead of 5, pads too far apart. The sand began adjusting the shape, carving and smoothing, pulling itself into new arrangements like a creature practicing delicate handwriting. Dog stepped away quickly. The print followed toward him, dragging itself a few inches through the sand as if refusing to be left behind. He bolted left. The desert responded instantly. 3 new prints formed ahead of him, wrong shapes, wrong angles, but unmistakably arranged to block his path. Dog skidded, nearly falling, and turned sharply the other way. The desert formed prints there too, more of them. Dozens now, some tall and narrow, some wide and flat, some barely more than shallow dips. The sand pulsed as each one appeared. Dog realized with rising terror, the desert wasn't just copying, it was inventing. He ran again, veering wildly across the blank sands, but every direction he took, new prints arranged themselves ahead, sliding into place, creating patterns he didn't understand. One set of prints elongated suddenly, growing into deep holes. Dog swerved to avoid them. Another group of marks fanned out like a row of stepping stones. Dog avoided those too. Every time he dodged, the desert learned. The prints adjusted, smoothed, refined, placed themselves more cleverly, more precisely, trying to anticipate his movements. Dog raced up the side of a dune. Sand usually crumbled underfoot, but this dune held him, pushing him upward, helping him climb. He reached the top and froze. Below him, the desert was alive. Dozens, no, hundreds, of prints unfurled across the sand in swirling formations, appearing, vanishing, reappearing elsewhere. Some resembled paws, others claws, others something else entirely. shapes that didn't follow any creature Dog had ever seen. The desert was practicing possibilities. Dog backed away in horror, tail tucked between trembling legs. A new imprint rose directly behind him. Deep, wide, almost perfect. A paw print. His paw print. Dog looked down at his own foot, then at the imprint behind him. A near match, only slightly warped at the edges. The desert trembled beneath it, proud, eager. Dog stepped backward, and the sand rose to create another paw print, this time correcting the errors, tightening the edges, adjusting the pad shapes. Dog understood now, nauseated. The desert was trying to keep him, trying to learn how to trace him, how to shape him, how to hold him, trying to make footprints that did stay. He spun and ran, but the sand beneath him lifted like a wave, choosing his path for him. The desert had learned enough. It wasn't going to let him choose any more. Dog tore across the sand in blind panic, paws striking the ground faster than he could process what was happening beneath him. But the desert no longer behaved like sand. It moved with him, beneath him, anticipating his direction, rising in shallow swells that guided his run the way a handler might guide a frightened animal by the collar. He tried to turn sharply left. The desert lifted a smooth ramp beneath him, forcing the turn wider. He tried to veer right. The sand tightened under his paws, refusing to give him traction. He tried to stop. The ground pushed forward softly, urging momentum. Dog's breath came in harsh, silent gasps. His heart hammered so loudly in his chest it almost drowned out the strange hush, swallowing the vast dunes around him. Then, as he crested a slope, he saw it. In the basin below, the footprints were no longer trying to mimic him. They were assembling, dozens of impressions, wide, narrow, deep, shallow, slid across the sand like moving tiles. They arranged themselves in spirals, arcs, branching lines. Some rotated, some merged, some dissolved and reshaped. It was no longer practice, it was construction. Dog skidded to a halt at the top of the dune. The desert did not erase this stop. It held him there, the sand rising subtly under his paws to stabilize his trembling legs. Below him, the footprints converged. One long elongated track pulled itself across the basin, dragging a curved trail behind it. Another imprint pressed down beside it, then another, smaller, three-toed, alien to any animal Dog had ever scented. They aligned themselves in a rhythm far too deliberate to be accident. Dog's ears pinned flat. The sand bulged upward beneath the gathered tracks. First a subtle lift, then a steady rise, pushing the footprints into a mound. The impressions clung to the sides, forming patterns like scales or plates. The desert was building something out of footprints. Dog whimpered, stepping back, but the dune behind him softened and gently pushed him forward again, keeping him in place. He barked, desperate, but the sound fell dead in the still air. No echo, no answer. Down in the basin, the mound grew. Two larger depressions slammed into the forming shape. New feet for the creature the desert seemed determined to make. The sand pushed upward beneath them, forming stunted legs. The earlier spiral prints coiled around the top, shaping a neck, a back, something like a head. Dog watched in horrified silence as the creature took form. It wasn't a true animal. It wasn't even a consistent shape. It was an attempt, a guess. The desert was trying to create a being that could leave footprints, footprints that stayed where dogs wouldn't. The mound wobbled, collapsing slightly, but the sand rushed in to reinforce it, holding the shape upright. It took a shuddering step forward, nothing more than a ripple of sand shifting beneath crude legs. The footprints followed the movement like muscles contracting. The creature stepped again. This time the sand beneath it held. The legs didn't collapse. The footprint-shaped plates clung to its sides. The desert exhaled, not with sound, but with a ripple through the dunes that Dog felt in his ribs. Dog backed away, fur bristling, but the dune behind him rose again, penning him in gently, carefully, insistently. The creature below turned, or attempted to. Its neck twisted in an awkward, searching arc. Its head, if it could be called that, dipped toward the sand. It pressed a newly formed foot into the ground. The impression it left behind did not fade. Dog's breath froze in his throat. The desert had succeeded. It had made a footprint that stayed. And now the creature lifted its head, a shifting mask of sand and patterns, and angled it toward Dog. The dunes beneath Dog's paws tightened. The creature began to climb, slowly at first, then faster, its movements jerky but improving with every push, every shift, every correction by the sand that built it. Dog turned to flee. The desert rose beneath him like a wave, blocking him, turning him, guiding him down toward the approaching creature. He barked again, a strangled, swallowed sound, as the sand creature reached the base of his dune. It stood on 4 unstable legs. It swayed. It waited. The desert pulsed under them both. Dog finally understood. The creature wasn't coming to trap him. It was coming to walk beside him. Because the desert had learned the one thing it could not force: movement that stayed. And now that it had made something that could leave its own trail, it wanted Dog to see it. It wanted Dog to teach it more. The creature lifted a foot. The footprint it left behind stayed perfect, sharp-edged, preserved by the desert like a prized memory. It stepped again. The trail formed, and the desert waited for Dog to follow.